Russian President Vladimir Putin says he will press on with the war in Ukraine, saying there can be no peace until Russia achieves its objectives there. He was taking questions from the public and journalists at his end-of-year press conference in Moscow. His remarks come as concern mounts in Ukraine that Western military aid could be in danger of drying up.
For more than 20 years, this carefully staged event has been used to present an image of a strong and self-confident leader. Last year, the marathon press conference was cancelled after Russian forces suffered major setbacks in Ukraine. Now the Kremlin is hoping to again project an image of power.
There will be peace when we achieve our goals, the ones you just mentioned. Now let's return to these goals. They have not changed. I'll remind you of what we talked about. The denazification of Ukraine, its demilitarization, its neutral status.
Vladimir Putin used these same words to justify his invasion of Ukraine. Nearly 2 years on, he's telling Russians that these goals have not been achieved, so the war has to continue. But he says there will be no mass mobilization, for now.
The flow of our men, who are ready to defend the interests of their homeland with arms in hand, is not decreasing. 1,500 people daily throughout the country. Altogether, there will be about 500,000 people by the end of the year. So, why do we need a new mobilization? There is no need for this right now.
The economic cost of Putin's war is also on people's minds in Russia. But even Western experts admit that despite rising prices and the falling value of the ruble, sanctions have failed to stop the Kremlin from financing its war.
This margin of safety is provided by several components. The first, and most important, is the high consolidation of Russian society. The second is the stability of the country's economic system. As it turned out, this was a surprise for our so-called partners and, to be honest, for many of us.
For more than 4 hours, the Russian president reassured the Russian public he had the situation under control. Regardless whether his statements match reality, his message was clear. The Kremlin has enough resources to continue Europe's bloodiest war in decades.
Let's get more on this then from our correspondent, Emily Sherwin, here with me in the studio, and DW's Riga bureau chief, Yuri Reshetto, is with us as well. Both used to report from Moscow until DW was banned in Russia. Let's start with you, Emily. So Putin spoke for 4 hours today. Why so long?
Well, it was his first big public appearance essentially since the war, and also this event that we saw today was kind of a combination of two traditional formats that Putin carries out. So essentially every year Putin does this call-in show, the direct line, where the public can call in and ask him questions, and he also does a press conference, and this was now a combination of both. And what we saw today was kind of a strange mix of everything. So you had him answering questions about foreign policy, and you had, people calling in, like a farmer from South Russia, who, we saw on video line with his cow. Then we had a man studying to be a pilot. So really a big mix. And we saw him present himself, I think, today as a statesman, a father of the nation, and also almost as a magician who can solve Russians' problems just, with the snap of his fingers.
And a couple of unusual moments that have been much discussed online.
Yes, so there was two moments that stood out, I think. One of them was that he took a question on AI, and the video that was actually that question from a student in St. Petersburg was actually a deep fake of Putin himself. Right. So essentially the student asked Putin a question as Putin, and it was kind of funny because Putin didn't initially see that was happening.
Now as you're talking,
and then he looked up and he suddenly saw himself. And he said, you know, he answered the question afterwards very calmly. But so that was, I think, a meme-worthy moment. And then the other thing was that there were also screens in the background during the whole event where also questions from the public were popping up. And some of them were very critical, including why is your reality, the reality of Putin, so different from our lived reality? That was one. When can we move to the Russia that is being shown on state TV? And also one said, don't run for president, make way for the young. Okay. So very critical. So then there was some discussion, are these questions, how can it be that these questions are so critical? Was this a hack? That kind of thing. I think it's very unlikely that
or was he just giving the appearance?
Exactly. It's stage managed very strictly by the Kremlin, this event. And, you know, it's supposed to give the image that it's democratic, that the people can ask him questions. And I think it's a safety valve as well for people to let off their frustrations, but in a very, very controlled manner.
OK. Yuri Reshetto in Riga. Did Mr. Putin say what Russia wanted to hear?
I think, Phil, if it comes to peace and to war, I don't think Putin has made many Russians happy today, because the desire of many Russians is the end of the war. The surveys show that. What we've heard, though, was that the war will continue as long as Putin's goals haven't been achieved, goals that haven't changed since the start of the war, and that is a bad sign. As a result, many people are likely to have criticized Putin today, but they may have done so in private, because all public criticism of Putin's policies is risky. Repressive laws are becoming so many that it's difficult to follow them. These include, for example, life imprisonment for treason, up to 15 years in prison for spreading so-called false information, which means criticism about those who help the Russian army. All in all, the Russian state is becoming increasingly harsh towards its citizens who don't agree with its policies. And to come back to the show today, I believe that a long war, which Putin has raised the prospect of, will only make the situation worse.
OK, so Emily Sherwin, the world will have been watching this, stage-managed though it is. Was there a message for the world from the Russian president?
Well, I think there was Putin's traditional defiance. You know, he showed, or he said that the war in Ukraine was going to continue. He also talked about the West as being an unreliable partner, while praising the reliability of China. He also talked about sanctions, which he said, you know, you all thought, or people thought, that our economy would collapse, but nothing has collapsed. So quite a bit of defiance there. But also, I think, a bit of hurt that he isn't being included in things on the international stage. You know, he talked about not meeting Macron and other leaders.
Oh, OK. Yuri, so he's going to be running again. President Putin will be running again for president in March of next year. Is it possible to say how much support he actually has at this stage?
Well, the independent Levada Center, Phil, has found that 87% of Russians are satisfied with Putin's work. At the same time, in a little over 3 months, you said that Russia will hold presidential elections. And if the presidential election were held next Sunday, Vladimir Putin would receive most votes, according to the polls. Similar indicators of support for the current president were recorded after 2014, so after the annexation of Crimea. I think it's because many people see that what Putin wanted to achieve is gradually happening, namely that the West is becoming increasingly tired of the war in Ukraine, and the aid to Ukraine is being questioned, at least in some Western countries. And although many Russians also wanted the war to end, they see a very satisfied president and say to themselves, hey, probably he's right, so may not have achieved his goal, but Ukraine and the West haven't been successful either.
Mind you, a strange person rings you in the middle of the day and says, do you support President Putin? You are unlikely to say no. Yuri Reshetto in Riga, thank you. Emily Sherwin here with me in Berlin, thank you.